This episode of La Verdad podcast is brought to you by our friend Sonia Figueroa of csonia.com.
Hey B-Fig.
What's up?
What's my favorite thing to do in the summer?
Watch baseball.
No. You know, my favorite thing to do is barbecue and family get-togethers, but it's hard to do when I don't have a nice big backyard.
True, which is why we should be reaching out to our chica Sonia if you want to buy a house.
Yeah, actually, Sonia has a ton of experience in helping people find the right home, especially first-time buyers, over 12 years to be exact. So, if you're listening right now and you have the itch on buying or selling, you need to contact Sonia Figueroa. Be-Fig, how can you do that?
Easy. Just visit www.csonia.com. That is www.seesonia.com. Or just search for her online. She also speaks Spanish.
Habla español, mi gente, and back to the show. You're now listening to La Verdad podcast. Bueno, mi gente, welcome back to another episode of La Verdad podcast, and this is your host, Christian, and this time I'm not going to forget her name. I don't know why I did that last time.
No, B-Fig. Last time, he were just recording maybe an hour, 2 hours ago, and he literally blanked on my name. How could you
I looked at her and I was like,
B-Fig on the mic, as always.
You know, as I mentioned in most of the podcasts, this is, we record usually all in one day, so I have my coffee for the second episode instead of the first one today.
So wake him up a little bit.
It's a Bustelo, straight black, to get me awake. Hopefully I don't get too jittery through my coffee. I usually never drink coffee past 10 o'clock in the morning, but this time I had to do it.
Make an exception.
It's a hot day in Chicago also, so I am sweating. I know if you're watching the video on YouTube, before we begin the podcast, I do want to emphasize and ask you guys to share the podcast. Go on to iTunes. Do me a favor, actually, if you go onto your phone, if you're listening to this through an Apple device and you're listening to it through the iTunes podcast app, I think it's just called the podcast app.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead and subscribe and give us as many stars as you want. Do a comment on there. Do a comment on there. It helps us grow. It helps us when we're trying to talk to other people, perhaps for sponsorship, so we could get more equipment or whatnot.
Yeah, let us know
and it just
what you
helps
think.
us to know that you're listening and that you're. If you love it, if you hate it, just send me an email. Don't put it out there. Also, if you go onto our Facebook page, go ahead and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, we're available as @La Verdad LTD. That is the @ La Verdad LTD. Or you can find us online at www.laverdadltd.com. And we have a special guest with us today, and this guy right here has been a follower of the podcast since the beginning. I want to say I think episode 2 or 3 probably got released, and then we got a message from our guest here today, and he was one of those guys that when he hit us up, I was like, yes, people outside of my circle are listening to this podcast.
Southwest side, man. Southwest side.
Because the whole time it was like my buddies listening or people that I know,
family and things like that.
So when you hit us up, I was like, okay, people are actually listening. And I'm going to ask you in a little bit how you heard about us. But right here, join with us, we have a teacher, blogger that has an also known as White Rhino on the social media side and in the blogger scene. We have Ray Salazar with us today. How are you?
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
How was your drive in, man?
It was slow and steady. just like I like my Sundays, slow and steady. Had a good cup of coffee, so I'm all good.
You know what it is? It's like right now we're in the middle of construction season, right?
Dude, I was trying to get to a McDonald's close to my parents' house, and I was trying to use the app Waze, and usually it's supposed to pick up on that stuff.
Good, yeah.
It did not pick up on all the construction by the McDonald's. I didn't even know if it was open. Sorry, tangent, but yes, construction
there is a lot
everywhere.
of construction going on, so I appreciate you coming by, especially on a hot day. It's like 90-something degrees outside. But you go by White Rhino on the blog side, and you're also a teacher. Let's talk a little bit more of the blog side for right now. How long have you been doing it, and why White Rhino?
Yeah, so I started the blog, The White Rhino, about 6 years ago. And I started it because I had been in teaching and education for about 16 years. I was having a difficult year. I just was not succeeding professionally, and it wasn't because of the kids. I had started at a new school, and the school got taken over by an education management company, and things were just not good. My philosophy, my value system didn't align with theirs, and it was just not a good match, and so it made my professional life extremely difficult. And I fell into a situation where I felt voiceless in my own profession, and so I thought back to some of the things that I used to do when I was in graduate school, when I was in my late 20s, and I started writing regularly, and I got a few articles published in magazines, and I was at the graduate writing program at DePaul. And so I started to find venues and opportunities to succeed and to get published as a writer, because that's what I wanted to do. And I thought, like, wow, I haven't done this in a while. And, I got a few essays on NPR. I was on All Things Considered, on the Tavis Smiley Show, and here on some of the local shows here in Chicago. And I hadn't done that in years. And life had just kind of, gone by. And it had been about 8 years since I'd really done anything significant. And I was just kind of missing it. Like, oh, I need to like, activate that again. So one night when I couldn't sleep because I was just stressed out about work, I started the blog. I didn't know anything about blogging. I just went to the Blogspot because I'd heard about it. And actually, the story is I couldn't sleep, so I'm flipping through the channels and all. I watched I got caught up with Julie and Julia, which is that movie about the woman who blogs her way through Julia Child's cookbook.
Yes.
And so they made it into a movie, and I was watching it. I'm like, well, shit, if they can make a movie out of this, I'm gonna start blogging. Right? So I go to blogspot.com and I wrote my first blog post at like 3:00 in the morning, and the title comes from a conversation that I had with an old buddy, and we met at an English teachers event, and he saw me. He's like, you're an English teacher? I'm like, yeah. He's like, so am I. He's like, wow, we're white rhinos. And I thought about that. I'm like, yeah, it's an endangered species. A lot of us, they don't exist. And so it's the idea behind my blog, and the blog title is that this is my opportunity to fight, to have my ideas survive in a really difficult context.
And blogging, it's been something that has been around since like the internet took over. It's one of those ways where I think just as like podcasts has blown up in a couple of years, in the last couple of years, blogging did that before podcasts, right? So it was like the way that people that were not journalists will get their viewpoints out there. I remember I always tell the team, I'm like, man, I want to blog, but I was the worst. I probably had the worst grade in English
in writing.
So I always sit there, I'm like, man, if somebody like Ray reads any of my blog, man, he'll probably like chew me up and tell me how bad of a writer I am. But that's why I stick to the podcast, and I just rather talk in there. But aside from the writing, any specific topic that you felt had to be put in a blog?
Yeah, so I knew that my blog was going to be about Latino and education issues. I wanted it to focus on those two issues.
Those are your passions, right? Yeah.
And that difficult year, I ended up teaching 7th grade for a semester, second semester, 6 classes of 7th graders. And it was difficult because I took over these 6 classes after they had a whole semester of 2 teachers and then sub after sub after sub after sub.
Oh, goodness. And so then it's like that middle school age group.
Yeah, it was.
So basically they kind of lost the whole.
It was the toxicity in those classes was just thick, and they were angry. They were angry that there was no stability in their lives.
Exactly.
And so I come in. I'm like, no, I'm sticking around for the semester. They're like, okay. And so it just wasn't good, and it wasn't their fault. And so one of the things that I saw was a big shift in the value system. Because the other part of it was that I started seeing that we had a generation of Latinos who were growing up, and they were being given everything. So there was this big focus on materialism. I had 12-year-olds that had better phones than I did. They had really good shoes. They had, horrible study habits, horrible behavior. Their vocabulary, it was just garbage.
Their penmanship.
And just like no concern for success, no focus on that. And then I would talk to the parents, and it really became, in many cases, a situation where I had to kind of convince them that their students really were, swearing and not fulfilling their responsibilities as students, and it was difficult. And so that was really bothering me because I didn't grow up like that, and this was something completely new from what I had experienced when I started my teaching career. So, and it still exists. I think on the Southwest side, we have an enclave of families who have quote unquote made it. Yeah. They're 1 or 2 paychecks away from losing everything, but they have, achieved some type of success, even though it's fragile. And so it's maybe has been without a lot of education. Yeah. And so that belief that education is the key to success doesn't exist. That gets spread down into kids intentionally or unintentionally. And then we start seeing kids who say, well, yeah, but I don't need to.
I don't need to go to, And I was just going to bring that up and kind of going into that conversation where do you deal with that a lot? Where you have a kid that, how do you convince that kid that perhaps the parents say, tienes que trabajar, you got to work instead of going to school. So a lot of them hit high school, right? And I think at the age you could drop out is what, 16?
16, 17.
Yeah. So you get there, right? And you're like, okay, I see so-and-so making decent money. He's buying his own stuff. He could afford his own Jordans or whatnot. And I'm stuck in school. I don't need school. And then the parents give them that mentality too. How do you fight that?
Actually, the interesting thing is that I have seen less and less students working in high school because parents are giving them everything. So the battle is actually not with the students who work, because with the students who work, they get it. They get that exposure and they see what quote unquote the real world is like. And so they're like, oh wow, like I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I need to, focus on my education and do something with it, right? Yeah. It's the kids who come from homes where they don't have any responsibilities, where parents tell them that their only job is to come to school. And so they are used to not doing anything at home. So they come to school and they feel like they don't have to accept responsibility there either. Yeah. They have $300 soccer shoes. They have telephones that are, paid for by their parents. They show up to schools with computers like this, and I tell them, like, man, I didn't get my Mac till I was 40 years old, and I had to get that on credit and pay it off little by little. And you're 17 and you got a Mac, and again, so it's this idea. I think well-intentioned parents, but they think it's almost like an investment. If I put into this kid financially, I'm going to get a return back. And what I try to help parents understand sensitively, because I know that they're doing it out of good intentions, is
right.
Look, if we give kids everything, they're going to end up producing almost nothing, because
that's so interesting.
They develop a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't think about it till like right now. I always thought about the parents that were like, oh, tienes que trabajar because we don't have enough. Yeah. But then, like you mentioned, the successful families that do have, perhaps dad has a business, not at home all the time. Right. Mom has her own business, probably not at home all the time. So the kids are getting everything. They don't get that sense of busting your ass and working at a fast food joint or retail. Right. That's what I had. I had that. I had to work. I was working overnight when I was a senior in high school on the weekends, and that's when I was like, "Fuck this, man! I need to get. I need to get a job that I'm sitting. I want to be the manager. Yeah, right. I want to be the guy telling this other person to work, because it sucked. Yeah. But now that I think about it, I appreciate that my parents were making me go to work and making me do this overnight thing, even though I was like, it felt like hell. Yeah. Yeah. But now that I think about it, I appreciate it, because if not, I probably would have not had to. It probably would have hit me really hard later on in life, and not appreciate the education that I was getting at the same time.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago, I had this class of seniors that oh man, they wore me out, because they were just good kids, senioritis like times 10. Oh. They just and then
that was me, man.
Things have changed so that we have more students staying in school, which is great. The problem is that they're not always the kids who find fulfillment in school. So by the time they get to senior year, where the only class that they have to take to graduate is English, if they pass everything else and they have 6 electives, it's tough to kind of get them motivated. But this class of seniors was something else, and I would just push them and try to get them to produce. And nicest kids ever. They were never disrespectful or anything, but they're just like, I got a D, man. I'm good. I'll graduate with that. And I'm just like, oh man. And so, I got an email from one of them later on, a few months after he graduated. And he's like, Salazar, he's like, I'm working at a tortilleria. He's like, I get it now. I get what you were saying. He's like, can you help me put my resume together? I'm like, yeah, man, come by one day and we'll help you put your resume together and just so that he has something a little bit more presentable that he can show out there. But again, it's because parents are sheltering them from those work experiences that we had. I worked at Burger King too. I started when I was 15 years old. Right. Because they're sheltered from those experiences, they don't get the realities until they're like 19, 20 years old. And that's a tough thing to face, especially if they've made other decisions in their life where they're a parent now, or they haven't looked into those post-secondary options as closely. And those jobs that existed when I was 17 where kids were making some decent money just aren't there anymore.
Right.
And so they're kind of stuck trying to figure out, okay, well, wow, what do I do now? And they're a little bit behind.
And what keeps you going though? I've talked to, I think you're the third teacher that we've had on the show, but you're the second one that I'm actually able to talk to about actually teaching. So I've asked this to another teacher who was he was a charter school teacher, CPS school teacher, my bad. And he was one of those teachers that I when I saw him, I was like, oh, you were probably that cool teacher. And I feel like you're the same way. Like you were that teacher that I could think of as not just my teacher, but someone that I could go to. What keeps you going, though, to be that figure? Because I know that you could get burnt. I know personally I'll probably get burnt out when you have a lot of these kids that probably don't care. What keeps you going? What is that one go-to thing that you always either read or listen to that's like, I got the fire back?
I think I've been blessed to have more kids throughout my 21-year career that actually do care, and that are trying, they're striving, and they want to succeed. They don't always know how to, or they always don't know what they need to do, but there's always some glimpse of aspirations, right? I think a couple of things is that one is I've always found motivation for my students in those small moments where you see somebody kind of make a good decision, or you see somebody turn their life around, or you just have a good conversation where you see that, okay, they're starting to get their lives together and they're going to be successful. That's one. I think the other part of it is finding a couple of good colleagues who you can really bond with, and kind of help each other through the moments. I'm lucky to have a wife who is also a teacher, and so we kind of understand each other. And then we also draw the line. We're like, okay, we got 20 minutes. What do you got to say about today? What do I got to say about today? And then we're shutting it off because we got to move on to other things.
It has to be so hard, I bet. Like just it's keeping tough. School work at work, and
it's.
I know. I live that struggle every day. That's why he's looking at me like, Vanessa, take notes.
20 minutes from now on.
Limit your conversation.
But I mean, you have to vent sometimes, especially in what you guys do. You guys work with kids. I don't have that. I work from home, so I don't deal with anybody else type from a phone conversation. But I always ask that question because I always look from the outside in, right? So it's kind of like if I was a teacher, I probably won't be able to do it, which is why I'm not a teacher, right? So, but then I feel like I take myself back to when I was 15, 16 and having teachers that were horrible. I had some teachers that I'm a product of CPS. I had some teachers that did not care. I remember I had one teacher who I don't think he passed his exam or something like that. He was already kind of like burnt out. You could tell that he probably was a really good teacher before, but at the same time, the school that I was in was kind of transitioning, and they closed down a bunch of other schools. So all the bad kids came from that school.
Kids.
Yeah, he was kids that, not bad kids, but kids that they didn't understand how to deal with those kids, right, and work with them.
And it's tough when you merge like two cultures, two communities, right? And all of a sudden you're like, boom, and now you're existing together.
So to give you an idea, I went to Lincoln Park High School. Right. At the time that I was there, a junior and senior, they closed down the schools in Cabrini Green. Right. So the kids that were already used to the culture in Cabrini Green, used to the teaching environment, which was much more strict, right, came to Lincoln Park High School that had open campus lunch, had no dress code, right. So you had these kids who, now that I think about it, they probably had a lot of potentials. It's just they didn't know how to teach them the way that they needed to be taught. So people were burning books, throwing books out the window.
Oh my God.
Like it was a zoo that last year. And I remember being there, and for a very little small time in my life I wanted to be a teacher until that day, and I was like,
he's like, nope,
I do not want to deal with a kid like this. I'll probably slap him across the head, you know. And I've seen a bunch of videos nowadays that happen. So what keeps you cool when you're dealing with kids like these?
I think part of it is experience, and now it maybe my students will disagree with this, but I think now I think it really takes a lot for me to get pissed off. And you know, the things that really have pissed me off are just when, you know, kids are being unkind to somebody, when they're being disrespectful, when they are doing damage to the learning space, right? That's what really pisses me off. So I think I've reached a point in my life where I have found fulfillment through my writing too, and that kind of keeps me going through this ability that I'm able to write and I'm able to fulfill my dreams, because sometimes I think teaching can become stifling, or we feel it is stifling, because it sucks up so much intellectual and emotional energy. One of my colleagues talked about how, you know, it takes so much out of us that sometimes we can't be there for the people in our personal life because intellectually and emotionally we're somewhere else, even at, you know, on the weekend and the Sundays, especially, like, oh wow, tomorrow and I got this and I got this and I got this, right?
That's
so
me.
it's a tough thing to manage, but I think my writing has helped me kind of work through some of these conflicts and some of these issues. So I feel like I have an outlet, so I get to vent a little bit, but I always try to make sure that with every problem that I present, there's always a solution too.
And is that something that you recommend? Perhaps there's a teacher listening to this that's probably new, and it's getting that feeling of being stressed out. Do you recommend them looking for something else to vent?
I think it's important to have something else. I think it's important to, you know, take some type of class or to do something where they don't have to be the leader, the decision maker, where they can go somewhere and just kind of do what they like to do under the direction of somebody else, you know? It's a dance class, an art class, a music class, you know, something where they can just kind of relax a little bit, or some type of exercise routine or something like that, something that's healthy, because I'll be honest with you, the first thing that lots of teachers turn to is liquor. And we drink a lot, and it's an easy thing, right? It's an easy thing, and I've had to cut down on my drinking, for a lot of reasons, mainly health reasons. But you know, it got to the point, I'm 44 now, and I'm just like, okay, I can't use liquor to kind of take the edge off at the end of the day, and I can't make every social outing with my colleagues, you know, a drunk fest. I just can't do that, because it's real easy to do that, right?
Right.
And so I've, you know, tapered that down, and I've kind of, you know, readjusted my outlets for letting out all of that frustration sometimes, you know.
Interesting. Now, as far as I know we talked about this before in other episodes where I always mention how teachers have the hardest jobs, I think, personally.
They do.
And it's like nonstop, even though like summer vacation is there, but you're really not on summer vacation. Some teachers actually work in summer
Year
school
round,
or do other things during the summer. And the pay tends to be really, really low, especially in where we're at right here in Chicago. Is that something that you've kind of blogged about or have you talked about, especially being here and working in Chicago, I want to say, is there a statistic as far as, are we on the low end as far as pay for teachers?
Well, I don't know. I know I've looked this up somewhere in terms of where CPS falls in terms of salary scale around the country. And then it's tough too to say, because, you know, every single city, right, every big urban city has a different lifestyle, right? So what you pay for rent here is very different from what you pay in LA and in New York. And
right,
so
you have to kind of
cost of living.
find the
cost
ratio,
of living, right? There you go. The cost of living is different. So when I started teaching, I was making $21,000 a year, right? Which is tough, especially when you start getting those student loan notices. Like, oh wow, I got to pay this, you know. And now I'll be honest with you, I've been doing this for 21 years. I'm at the top of the pay scale in terms of that. So I make good money. I make no bones about it. I make good money. I'm very happy with the money that I make. The problem is that people will ask, do teachers get paid enough? And it's not an easy question to answer. You know, do I feel like I get paid enough? there's plenty of things that I do outside of the clock that I don't get paid for. Like now, I get paid for 6 hours and 15 minutes every day, but I have to be in the building on the clock for over 7 hours, right? So and people are like, wait, you don't get paid for over an hour every day? I'm like, yeah, I don't get paid. And it's not my lunch, right? It's not where I can just, kick back and, wow, I have an hour to myself to go and have lunch. No, it's always working. Lunch is like a 20-minute lunch, and sometimes it's like
you're
in the middle of something.
It.
Right, working through it, right? So it's a tough question to answer. The starting scale now for teachers, I think with a bachelor's degree, and we'd have to look this up, I think is in the high 40s, maybe 50. But now teachers who are starting in CPS, now they have to make their pension payment with a new contract, right? So that takes another chunk, about 7% out of their
wow.
So it's taking it out of their, and I know that's been kind of a big debate. I haven't really followed too much on the whole, teacher strikes and the whole teachers union debates and all of that. I know that's something that you've blogged about in the past as far as what's happening in there. Anything that you want to share with us as far as, is it looking positive? Is it kind of like in a, whatever you want to share as far as that goes?
I think, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what teachers do. I think people still think that one of my neighbors actually told me one day, he's like, and he's a working class guy, and he's like, wow, Ray, he's like, you must get really sleepy sitting at your desk all day. And I was like, wow, that's not what I do. No, that's not what I do. And actually, I never sit, like I'm always walking around, And so I think many people think that teaching means sitting at a desk, passing out worksheets, collecting those worksheets, and just kind of have this transactional relationship where, okay, I give you this, you give me that, and let's kind of keep going. And I think what we need to understand is that, there's so many elements to teaching. Number one, it's the planning to it and everything that goes into making sure that things are well organized, so that when kids are in front of us, they're actually the ones doing the work. But in order for that to happen, there has to be a lot of planning that goes into that so that things run smoothly. So, and then there's the academic side. So, my job is to help kids to be better writers. And so it's making sure that I'm finding a way to meet each one of them at their individual level, but at the same time challenge them and help them grow. Then the other side of it is the social emotional side, which we forget about.
And that's
a tough
big
part because we have, social media has opened the doors to information and to relationship building superficially, but it also leads to insecurities. It leads to bullying. It leads to a lot of situations where a person feels less than because they're constantly comparing themselves to everybody else that they see on social media. And if people don't react to their post, all of a sudden, they didn't like it. Nobody likes me. And so it's this constant competition and self-assessment that works against the development of young people. When I grew up, I didn't have any of that, so I just kind of did my thing,
Right.
And so I think those are the things that are happening there. I don't think that this city values the role of teachers and the role that we can play. And like in any other profession, there are people who are not good at their jobs and who don't succeed and who should not be in that profession. But there's many more people who are good at their jobs and who do some incredible things. But we don't have a culture in the city, and I think even nationwide, where teachers are valued. Part of it is our own fault. I don't think that the people who represent us, and sometimes I'm talking specifically about some of our union leaders, are not the most articulate or intellectually engaging people, the most emotionally stable people when it comes to communication. Let's be honest, they're confrontational, they're volatile, they encourage that antagonism, and I think union leadership has a lot to learn, has a lot to change in this context, and unions really have to change their kind of constant warfare mentality with the powers that be, because we live in a different time, and that can't always be the case. And I think that we need to find more opportunities to get positive examples of teachers and students out there, so that people say, wow, CPS public education really does do some really good things.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because like I mentioned before, from the outside looking in, that's all you see, right? It's like, oh, look at this guy, bad product of CPS, or look at this other guy, or this school, the rate is going down. But we're not doing, as a city, right? We're not doing what it takes. And it's funny that you mentioned the leadership is not doing what it takes to show the positive. And I'm sure if they show the positive, it's like somebody investing, right? It's like, okay, I want to pay a little bit more. This guy might work for my company. And I think and this is a whole conversation that we could take for another episode, where charter schools are kind of becoming a big thing now, is because you do have these investors who are thinking of, hey, you know, if I put money here, it is, unfortunately. But I do want to take that conversation mostly for another episode, because we could definitely talk about that for a long time.
But bring me back, because my kids go to a charter school, so it's a tough conversation, because I do, and I say, you know, if I could open up my own high school, it would probably be a charter school, because it would, then I have more flexibility to do what I want. But then there are organizations in this city that have turned charter school operations into a business, right?
And I am gonna dig into it a little bit right now. So, and that's where it gets me. And that's where it gets me a little bit. I love charter schools, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm also very scared of it, because I feel like a lot of times they push out the bad kids, right? So if it's a kid that, and I always say the bad kids, but in reality, it's just a kid that
is not meeting their standards.
Yeah, perhaps you need to teach them in a different way, right? Not everybody is set to be taught the same way, right? It's not a cookie cutter operation, and I feel like, especially here, we do that a lot. We everybody has to have this lesson plan. I don't know, I'm not a teacher, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a lesson plan, and they have to meet this thing for the test, and if they don't do it, that means they're not smart, right? Or they can't advance to the next grade. So I feel like with charter schools, they're able to do a little flexible in their own way, but also they tend to, they don't have those laws of keeping that kid there or whatnot, so they might kick them out if it makes them look bad. And that's just from the outside looking in and seeing other people that have worked for charter schools or perhaps are in a charter school now, and that's what scares me. You know, it scares me.
And I think it's important to remember that, you know, CPS has its own record of pushing kids out. So my first teaching job was at an alternative high school, and many of the kids who were there, the young women were there because they had to drop out because they had a kid. Many of the young men who were there had been dropped out or pushed out because they had some issues, usually with gangs.
And usually the alternative schools are part of the CPS program.
When I started in 1995, they were something separate. And so they were. They were completely independent.
But funded by the government and all that?
We received, so when I started as a teacher, the alternative school that I was at did not receive any funding from CPS. It was completely independent. It got some money from the state. It got some money from the Alternative Schools Network, which is kind of still around. Now there's an umbrella organization, and the name of it is escaping me right now, but the charter schools in Chicago, the alternative high schools, kind of unified under this umbrella organization. And then CPS started funding alternative high schools maybe my second year as a teacher. But again, the point there was to deal with the bad kids who got kicked out, right? So you know, traditional schools always have a way of also getting kids out, you know, and you know, private schools are, you know, just as guilty, right? And so you know, people think, oh no, you know, if I go, you know, the kids are better, the education is better. Well, you know, not necessarily.
Now, as far as I was watching an article or a documentary talking about Chicago public schools specifically, but public schools in general, right? And segregation, and how that plays a big role into creating these quote unquote bad kids or lowering the standards. They were talking about the original segregation law that got put in place, where, you know, you had the buses taking kids to schools so that it was a mix of black and white kids, right? And then they took the buses out because of funding, right? And so it created another segregation, especially here in the city of Chicago. I feel you go to the south side, you go to especially around 26th Street, Pilsen, Little Village, mostly all Mexicanos, right? You go Humboldt Park area, Clemente, mostly Puerto Ricans. Now it's kind of changing. Belmont Cragen area, Polish and Mexican. Do you feel like that creates perhaps a bad environment for teaching, since everybody has it's a culture that you're dealing with? Maybe they have a different types of teaching methods for them.
Well, I think one of the problems that we have that contributes to the segregation of schools is that students are assigned to schools according to where they live. So the problem with that is that we have reached the point, I think, and I wrote about this in one of my blog posts, you know, we have now a reality where sometimes our work and family connections and network isn't a nuclear kind of a setup, right? So that it used to be that, you had a stay-at-home mom and everything that you needed was in your neighborhood, and you went to the neighborhood school and the neighborhood park and everything was there. But now with, the way families work and people travel, and so they're not always closer.
Yeah.
So one of the blog posts that I wrote about, and this was actually on Education Week, argued that we should stop assigning kids to schools by their zip code. If a family decides that they want to send their kid to a local school, then fine, there should be a spot there for them. There should be a seat there for them, because they're entitled to, and they should have easy access to the school that's nearest to them. But then any seats that are left over, like, why not raffle them off in a lottery, right?
Yeah.
If you want to go there, like for us, sending our kids to our neighborhood school, which is literally like right across the street from us, was not convenient because it didn't have an all-day kindergarten program. So, when my, kid got out, where was he going to go? We were both working. We had nobody to pick him up. So, we found a charter school that had a full-day program, and it was closer to one of our family members. And so, it's... If we change the way that students are admitted into schools, that would help address some of the segregation. And I think that would definitely help encourage more of a diverse educational experience, because then you're not always in or surrounded by
You learn
a lot in the classroom, especially. I mean, it wasn't until I went to college that, I went to, in grammar school, mostly it was Latino, right? I went to mostly Mexican and Puerto Rican. In high school, mostly Mexican, and then Mexican and Puerto Rican had their own little spot. The African American their own little spot, and then you had Asians.
It still segregates, right? You still segregate into the groups.
So I never really stepped out of that. It was not until I went to college, which I was like the minority, right?
So was I. Yeah.
So and then that's when I was kind of like, whoa, I need to identify myself with the culture.
Yeah.
But I felt like maybe if I had this in grammar school, maybe if I had this in high school, I probably would have gotten better grades. I probably would have gotten a scholarship, because I would have been talking to these other kids that the parents were pushing them for scholarships. Not saying that my parents weren't, but maybe their parents already had the experience of getting a bachelor's, master's, PhD, or whatnot. So I didn't have that, and I felt like when I was reading that article about the segregation, I was like, man, there's a lot of kids who are around other kids who the most that their parents have done is probably graduated high school. Nothing against them or anything like that, but that's the only goal that they have, right? They need to surpass that. Or perhaps they don't know anything else about it. They don't know about FAFSA. They don't know how to fill out an application for college. They don't have the money to pay for the application for college. So that always kind of resonated a lot with me in the sense that, we didn't have that option of being able to go to a different high school. I got lucky that I went to Lincoln Park because I played music, right? But if not, I would have been stuck to going to Foreman, which is the Belmont Cragen High School. Right.
So how, as a teacher then, obviously working with mostly Latinos, right? How do you combat that issue where if where these kids are, this is the only space that they know, how do you, maybe with, I'm sure, limited resources, open their eyes, broaden their horizons, show them that there's other opportunities, because of the fact that, like, unless their parents have a higher education, or unless they can speak the language and know enough English to know what is the FAFSA and all the things you were just talking about. How do you do that when you're so limited to the space and the resources that you have?
One of the things that I think CPS does deserve credit for is that it has pushed to create a college-going culture in many high schools.
Okay.
How that works out individually at every school is a little bit different.
Sure.
Our students are very lucky to have a group of counselors who are highly dedicated to making sure that they are well informed about FAFSA, that their parents are well informed about FAFSA. Now, parents have to, step up and make sure that they attend the information sessions and have those conversations. And
that's another battle in itself.
And give them their paperwork. I mean, I have students who say, Salazar, my dad won't give me his tax forms. Like, what do you mean? Because they got to do their tax returns for FAFSA. Like, like my dad doesn't want to give me the tax returns, for, whatever, reasons are there. And so, we still come up against that. But I think what I try to do as a writing teacher is make sure that I, number one, focus our lessons around some essential questions that carry long-term meaning, because I want to make sure that what students produce in their writing can live and breathe outside of our classroom. So, we'll look at some issues of personal choices and decision-making, and we try to find a way, and we'll take a look at a few examples of well-written essays that help students kind of understand how personal experiences can be significant to not just the person who lived them, but also to readers. And that's the hard part with personal writing, because we always think, oh, well, if it was important to me, then it was great. It's like, no, if it doesn't mean anything to your audience, who gives a damn, right?
Right.
And so that's the first part, is getting them to think about their own lives from somebody else's perspective. And sometimes it's real difficult for a self-centered teenager. A self-centered adult, that sometimes, it's difficult.
Yep.
The other thing that I do is that I try to take on some controversial issues when there is something big happens in the city. So like when the Laquan McDonald incident happened and the mayor came out and gave his speech, I know that they might have some conversations about those issues in their circles, but then we start looking back, okay, well, what have we studied? We've studied how emotions affect our decision making and how emotions are used to get people to react in certain ways. So let's take a look at what the mayor is trying to do, and what emotion was the mayor trying to evoke in the speech, and did he succeed or not? So we'll kind of take a look at that. We look at the issue of poverty, and we look at Linda Torado's essay, why people make terrible decisions, and she talks about, what it's like to be poor. And, a lot of these kids, for some of them, it's a confrontation with a whole other reality, because they don't know what it's like to be poor. They don't know what it's like to struggle. Their parents might be struggling and figuring out, damn, how are we going to pay the mortgage? But kids are fine. They got their phones, they got their shoes, they got their nails done. It's good. We watch a really good video from the Brookings Institute on social mobility that, talks about if you are born into the lowest quintile and you don't graduate from high school, here are your chances of reaching it to the top quintile. And for some kids, it's like, wait, social mobility, wait, what? It messes with their mind, because again, they think they've already made it. And so when we look at the quintiles, it's like, no, this is probably our part of the world is probably the second quintile. Look, there's other places to go, and then it's a conversation about how to get there, right? And those quick wins, because they think, oh well, they hear somebody's success story, and they're like, oh well, yeah, that's I can do that too. And like, well, maybe, but let's think about how much luck went into that. So it's really getting them to think about other kind of concepts. Two other big documentaries that we watch are Misrepresentation, which focuses on the role that advertising has on women and in female image. But I'll tell you a documentary that I think has had an even bigger impact than Misrepresentation is The Mask That You Live In, which talks about what media does to men and to masculinity, and this idea of toxic masculinity, right? And so kids are just, every year they're just enraptured by it. They're like, Salazar, put the video on, so we learn some vocabulary, we learn hyper masculinity, we learn about the bro code, we learn about all these kind of understood and subtle kind of expectations that there are for men, right? And so it kind of challenges their whole sense of being, to start thinking about, look, this is what this is what we know about being a man, being a woman, but let's kind of go beyond that and kind of see what other realities are out there.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I kind of want to go into the conversation of the Father's Day articles that you, it was the audio versions that you had on there, on which you could find on the website. Before we continue, where can they find you on social media so that they could?
On Twitter, I'm at White Rhino Ray, and then you can also look for the White Rhino blog on chicagonow.com, and it also has a Facebook page.
So Ray had actually sent me a couple links of these audio snippets that he had put out there during Father's Day, and to me it was really cool. It was like he read my mind, because I kind of wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to talk to other men that are out there, and this brings me into the discussion of feelings, right? Latino men and feeling, especially Latino men, because we're so machista and we try to say, oh, we don't have any feelings or whatnot. But one of the conversations was there, like a Latino punk rocker's dad guides his son to become a DJ, right? Yeah. So there was that conversation. There's also conversations on how they will have a conversation with each other watching TV, right?
Or no conversation, just watching the TV. With that moment of just being there with as a kid with his dad.
So that brings me to the whole thing of, and this kind of goes with teaching too, and perhaps what you do as a teacher, of dealing with the kids who don't show the emotion, right? Yeah. Don't want to show their feelings, perhaps because they never got that from their dad, or their dad told them, like you mentioned it earlier, and they didn't want to share their taxes.
Right.
Perhaps the dad doesn't want to tell them how much they make, right? Because to them is, I make the money, you just worry about going to school. So what are your feelings on that? And before we go into that, what made you do this little series for Father's Day?
So I've been working on this novel for the last 16 years, and it's a novel about music in 26th Street and this guy who's trying to kind of make sense of his ambition, and I actually just signed a book contract with La Casita Grande in Colorado. So
Congrats.
Thank you. So the book will be out summer of 2019, and it's called The Hot Mix.
Awesome.
And I was researching to write this book, which is essentially a novel about a father and a son, and this son who's 20 years old and is growing up around 26th Street, and he's got a lot of ambition, and he wants to be a mechanic, and he's looking for guidance from his father, who's unambitious. He's got a factory job, and he's content with that, and they don't own a car, and he's content with that. He's a functioning alcoholic. He goes out, partying by himself Fridays and Saturdays, and so he's trying to get guidance and motivation from his dad and some type of bond, and it's just not happening. And one of the things that I remember reading when I was looking at some of the psychology about father-son relationships is that somewhere I read that when a man is asked to talk about his life, he usually begins by talking about his father. And that really stuck with me, right? So I said, what can I do for Father's Day around that idea? So I reached out to one of my best friends, David Toro, who actually grew up around here in the Belmont-Cragen community, and my compadre, a good friend of mine, Sergio Hernandez Jr. And I said, hey, can you guys be part of this? We're the three of us are in our 40s. The three of us are our father's firstborn. The three of us have fathers who are immigrants. Like, I want to have a conversation with each one of you individually about what you've learned about fatherhood from your dad, and what that relationship was like, and what your father has given you, either in a tangible form, or maybe in a philosophical form, or something related to your value system. And so they said, we're into it. And the thing about it is that each one of us has a father who had a relationship with music in a different way. For my compadre Sergio, his father was a punk rocker. He was in a punk rock band, right? For my buddy David, his dad used to MC events, and he's big into music, and he was a musician, and he played the flute. For me, my dad was all about norteñas, right? And our road trips, it was always norteña music, and that's the core of his identity to this day. And so I just wanted to capture some conversations more and some reflections about what it means to be a father today in our 40s, and have a father who raised us the way that they did, and kind of what that means for us as men today.
And it's very interesting too, because I could kind of reflect on that too, where the way that me and my dad to this day we bond is through music, right?
Okay.
So I've been playing music for a very long time, and then he is a huge fan of salsa music, right? This is why I know what I know for the podcast, and people see it, they're like, wow. And that's the way that we bonded, right? And for example, I have another friend where his dad will bond with his son by just playing guitar, right? And that's it. That's all they did.
There's no conversation, or is there a conversation with your dad? Or
well, yeah, about the music.
About the music, right?
Exactly. But it's something that I know later on in life, I'm always going to remember that. Always going to remember. And I've heard it from other people too, be mecaneando, doing car mechanic work. And sometimes I sit there and I'm like, I wonder if I do the same thing with my daughter, like, do I have so I try to make sure that I do have a conversation with her, but I know that I do certain things that she's probably later on in life going to remember, like, oh yeah, we used to hang out and do this, or just talk in the car and do that. So I think that resonated a lot with me, those articles, and I'm sure it's resonated with a lot of people. And if you do want to, mi gente, if you do want to follow, take a quick look at it or listen to it, where can they go to check that out? Yeah,
they can go to chicagonow.com and just type in the White Rhino, and it'll pop up. Or they can go to Twitter, the Facebook page, and they can see the links there.
And I'll also put it, for those listening to the podcast via the podcast app, I'll put it on the description of this podcast, the link, so that you could go ahead and easily click on it, and it takes you to all of Ray's articles on blogs and the ones that we're talking about right now. We've talked about a lot of stuff today. I loved it. It was like an awesome conversation. I still feel like we need to come back and talk a little bit more about some issues that are happening. This one today, I think it was real good to have an introduction of what you do. Not only that, but talk a little bit more of how it is to be a teacher, especially a Latino teacher, and someone who loves what they do. So I appreciate you coming by here. We're close to the hour right now, actually.
That was quick.
Yeah, it was
Flies, right?
it was a quick one, man, but it was good. It went well. Say your social media handles again one more time for those listening.
And Twitter, I'm at White Rhino Ray. On Instagram, I'm at 26th Street Ray. And you can look for the White Rhino at chicagonow.com and also on the blog's Facebook page.
And be on the lookout for the novel that he's going to be releasing in
summer 2019, The Hot Mix, and it's thanks to La Casita Grande in Colorado.
We'll definitely be working together. I do want to talk more off the air. There's a lot of stuff that I want to pick your brain at. I appreciate you being one of our followers from the beginning. Like, that's awesome to me, and being able to come onto the show.
It's good stuff, man. It's good stuff.
Mi gente, if you can share this episode with those who might want to know a little bit more about education, what's happening in Chicago, and those who perhaps want to get started on blogging, go ahead and share this episode with them. I appreciate you coming by.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's been awesome, like always.
Thank you.
And mi gente, peace and God bless.
Thank you. Have a good Sunday.